Are you ready to take your business to the next level? Every day there are countless books and articles that are published offering the key on how to make your business a success. It's easy to feel overwhelmed trying to keep up and run your business. That's why Deb Creer created the Business Power Hour. Keep up on the latest trends, best practices, and techniques for how to make your business a success. Let the Business Power Hour do the heavy work for you.
Good morning. Good morning. I am Deb Creer, and I am passionate about giving professionals the tools that they need to make themselves and their businesses as successful as possible. Now, I always say I'm excited to talk to my guests, and I always am, but I'm going to love talking to my guests today because I like talking branding and personal branding. And so please join me in welcoming Paige Arnof-Fenn to our program today. Welcome, Paige. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much. I'm excited to talk to you today, too.
Yay, we're going to have so much fun. Well, let me tell folks a little bit about you, and then we will jump into this. So Paige Arnof-Fenn is the founder and CEO of the global branding and digital marketing firm, Mavens Moguls. I love that name, based in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Her clients include, hang on, folks, Microsoft, Virgin, the New York Times Company, Colgate, as well as venture-backed startups and nonprofit organizations. She's also a smart cookie. She graduated it does not say that in her bio. I added that. She graduated from Stanford University and Harvard Business School. Paige sits on several boards, is a popular speaker and columnist who has written for Entrepreneur and Forbes. Oh my gosh, so excited. We're going to have such a great conversation today. So, Paige, again, welcome. You've listened to some of the programs and I always say, tell us how you got to where you are today.
Well, it's kind of been a circuitous route. Like most people's careers, I would have guessed I'd be here. And I think it was Steve Jobs that said, careers only make sense looking backwards, not forwards. And I think I totally agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was a student, I looked at people like Meg Whitman and Ursula Burns, these Fortune 500 women CEOs. And I thought, that's the career path for me.
Okay.
Both my grandfathers and my dad were in business. They all ran companies. And I wanted to be a big business person too. So that was the path I was on. I got an economics degree in college. I got an MBA. And so, I started my career at big companies, Procter and Gamble, Coca-Cola, big Fortune 500 firms. And that was the path I thought I'd be on for the duration. And then the internet came onto the scene in the mid to late 90s. And it was like the shiny object I kept getting distracted by. And I was reading articles and seeing all these fun companies popping up, raising millions of dollars and kind of changing the world. And I was sitting in my big, cushy corporate office thinking I was on the sidelines and I was missing out. So I quit my job at Coca-Cola, moved from Atlanta to Los Angeles, and, joined an internet startup 5 blocks from the ocean where everybody wore jeans and shorts to work. They had tattoos. They brought their dogs to work. I'd never seen anything like that.
It was not corporate America.
Exactly. And, it's like fasten your seatbelt. We raised, I think, $40 million. We went public and we were sold to Yahoo.
Wow.
And it was really fun working for a business no one had ever heard of and creating a brand from the ground floor. And so after that, I was kind of addicted, to be honest. And my husband and I were going to move back to the East Coast because he got a job in the Boston area. And I joined another startup as the head of marketing. And less than 2 years later, it got sold to the largest privately held media company in the world.
Wow.
Then I did another startup as the head of marketing. And then we went public and we were sold to a bigger company. And so, at that point, I was hooked. There was no turning back. But 9/11 happened, and you're old enough to remember. That's when marketing budgets got cut.
Right. People were like, we don't need to market. Really? You need to market more.
Exactly. But everybody kind of shut down their marketing to save their pennies, and the stock market was dropping 500, 600 points. And back then, that was a real shocker. Today, it drops that much
We're like,
practically
it's
every month.
Tuesday.
Nobody even blinks anymore. But back then, it was a shock. And so, I had gotten lucky at 3 startups. I didn't work for Google or Facebook or LinkedIn, but they all three had positive exits. And I was young. I was just in my early 30s. And so I really didn't need to work, but I wanted to work. I loved it. Like I said, I'd kind of gotten addicted. And people started coming out of the woodwork after 9/11 saying, Paige, we need your help. I had worked for 3 venture-backed startups that all had great exits. So I knew a lot of investors. I had a lot of classmates from business school who were CEOs or on boards of companies. And people just said, you know what you're doing. Can you help us? My first instinct was, no, I'm not a consultant.
Right. Yeah.
I'm always the client. I was the chief marketing officer. I was the one kind of in the client seat on that side of the table. But my husband said, Paige, you've been doing this for a long time.
Right.
You know exactly what you're doing. You've got a great track record. It's a red flashing sign in front of you.
Do this, do this.
These people need your help. You know what to do. So because 9/11 had just happened, it was the end of the year and people were still a little skittish about getting on airplanes. So everybody was home for the holidays that year. And in Boston, I had a lot of friends, a lot of former colleagues and classmates. So we just started going to a lot of holiday parties at people's homes. And every time we went to a party, I'd walk out with 2 or 3 business cards of people saying, can you call me after the holidays? I'd love to talk to you about.
I need to go to those parties with you. Holy schmoly.
And before I knew it, I had people who had problems, and I knew a lot of people who had gotten laid off after 9/11 who were some of the best marketers I'd worked with in my career. I had people, I had projects, and I put them together. And I called the women the marketing mavens and the guys the marketing moguls.
I love it.
And that was like my working name. And when I realized we actually did have a bunch of clients, I thought, oh boy, we better build a website. We better look official. I'm going to need a logo, a tagline. I need something to stationery to put the proposals on, send invoices. And so I tested a bunch of names, very serious names. And I threw Mavens and Moguls in there just as a placeholder because that was in the website I was building with a college buddy of mine, and sent it out to about 100 people. And Mavens and Moguls was one of the top names that came back. People loved it. They didn't actually even know what it meant, but it sounded fun.
Right.
And one of my questions was, I don't want to be a boring company. Like, we're marketing, we're branding. And, if we can't brand ourselves, is anyone going to trust us and hire us? So before I knew it, we were in business. We just, put the website up and started taking meetings. And before I knew it, I had people, I had projects all over. And because I had started my career at places like P&G and Co., and I'd gone to school with people from all over the world, we had clients all over the world from pretty much the get-go. So I have people in 14 cities around the US. I've got people in major metro areas abroad. And that was 4 years ago.
Wow.
We're still going strong. So that's the root. Who knew?
I love it. I love it. And marketing is marketing is marketing. The basic tenets are the same. Yes, you need industry knowledge of whatever, but I mean, hello, Google, and now with AI, we can get up to speed pretty fast. And but I love hearing how you branded yourself, because I kind of went through the same thing when I started my company about the same time period ago, right? And it was after 9/11, but not too far, and because that was when I thought, I'm not sure I want to work in corporate America anymore. But you tried different names, all of this, and it was one of those where, I didn't want to have a name that I thought would limit. So I didn't want my name. I didn't want, I was in Denver at the time, so I didn't want Colorado, Rocky Mountain, anything like that. And so, I came up with Wise Women Communications. And part of that was because I was specifically targeting women. And so I thought, okay, now I work with men, their money is green. And I also, have consultants who are men. And so, but wise women, I don't know why I got blurry all of a sudden. Wise women, just really kind of hit the spot.
No,
And
I get it. And we both kind of have a nice alliteration. You with
right.
the W's, we with
Mm-hmm.
me with the M's.
Mm-hmm.
And like you, I did not want to use my
Mm-hmm.
name.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't want a generic name like
Right.
Strategic Marketing Advisors,
Mm-hmm.
Integrated Marketing Solution.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like that just sounded
Mm-hmm.
boring.
Right.
And I thought, if your name is clever and people, it's a
Mm-hmm.
conversation
Mm-hmm.
starter. If a man shows
Mm-hmm.
up at the meeting and like all of a sudden, what are you, a wise woman? And then
Yeah.
he's got a smart
Mm-hmm.
response.
Mm-hmm. Right.
That's how you break
Mm-hmm.
through. That's
Mm-hmm.
how you
Right.
stand out today.
Right.
And so that's a
Mm-hmm.
great
Mm-hmm.
way to put a stake in the
Mm-hmm.
ground and say, we've got some personality, we've
Mm-hmm.
got a little
Mm-hmm.
attitude, and I think that's a great
Mm-hmm.
way to start a business.
Right. Right. And we definitely have to, right? Um, and what is, so many people, I mentioned limiting, and you said things like, strategic marketing consulting, yada, yada, yada. Then the problem is you're stuck doing marketing, or you have to completely and totally rebrand. And we've, I'm sure you've worked with companies that have done that, where they've said, hey, we do more than what our name is.
Absolutely.
And so, for anybody who's thinking about, starting a company and what you want to do, it's a big challenge. And because then the other thing that you need to do is, hello folks, search and make sure nobody else has the name. And depending on what it is, you might want to trademark it. And some things like that. But yeah, it's funny, I've only in 20 plus years had one organization say, hey, you have the same name. And it was really funny because it was a women's chamber of commerce that I belonged to. And they said, well, our one of our committees is Wise Women Communications. I said, you understand trademark law, right? You know, a committee at something is not in any way an infringement. I said, and if anything, I could go after you,
Right.
because I have the trademark. But yeah, and with Google, folks, it is pretty, or whatever you want to use. It's pretty easy to find out if your name is already taken. And it is a challenge. But I think that's where we get some of the cute names, or the cutesy, I should say. But yeah, it's, but I love Mavens and Moguls because that exactly explains who you are.
Yeah. And
And
for people that don't know, maven is a Yiddish word for
mhm,
expert,
mhm,
or my
mhm.
great grandmother would have said know it all. She would have been shaking her head.
Yes.
And a
There goes
mogul,
Paige again.
yeah,
Mhm,
exactly.
mhm,
And a mogul, if you look it up in the Merriam-Webster
mhm,
dictionary, is someone of rank, power, or
mhm.
distinction in a
Right.
specified
Mhm.
area.
Right.
So I look at this group
Mhm,
as, real marketing
mhm,
experts. We're the
mhm.
practitioners.
Right.
Like
Mhm,
I said, we were on the other side of the
mhm,
desk before we
mhm,
became
mhm.
consultants.
Right.
So, we know what we're doing. We've been
Mhm,
doing it a long time,
mhm,
and we can give you
mhm,
kind of tried and true
mhm,
advice because I
mhm.
think between us, we've made every mistake in the book.
I know. Mhm,
We can
mhm,
save you a lot of
mhm,
time and kind of start
mhm.
you at a much higher level than you
Right.
would have been
Mhm,
able to do on your own.
mhm,
So for me, the name works. And like I said,
mhm,
after more than 2 decades, I still like it.
mhm,
And people remember it. We
mhm.
break through. And even
Right.
though my company name has an
Mhm,
ampersand,
mhm,
Mavens and Moguls,
mhm,
my last name is hyphenated.
mhm.
I've had people call me and say, or, tell me at events, I can never remember all the names. And so when I go to Google, I'll put in Paige and Mavens.
Mm-hmm.
Thank goodness for search engine optimization. I pop right up.
Cool.
You can find me. And as you know,
Right.
half the battle is they have to be able to find you
Right.
when they have a problem that you can
Mhm.
help them solve.
Right.
You want them to think of you first. So if you can break through the clutter and the noise, that's winning in today's market.
Right. Oh yeah. And a big part of it, I mean, you mentioned your first name and that you're hyphenated. Personal branding from the CEO down to the person in the mailroom, right? But especially senior executives. To me, that's one of the most important things is personal branding. And what I see is they get so caught up in they are their business that they forget that they need to brand themselves. So, talk to us a little bit about that. Why is it so important that we still have our own personal identity?
So, it's a great question, and it's relevant for small businesses. It's relevant for people that work in big organizations. I think one of the questions that I get all the time from people is, I'm not famous. I don't work for a company.
Why do I need to do this?
Right. Why do I need to be a personal brand? I'm not Taylor Swift. I'm not LeBron James. Like, why does anybody care about little old me? But I think if we learned anything during COVID, it's that if you don't exist online, you don't exist.
Right. If
You've
people
got,
can't find you when they search,
if you're invisible, that's a really bad strategy for your business.
right. Right.
And even though people like you and me made a very conscious decision not to use our personal names in our business, we are very much associated with and identified with the brands that we built. So you really do need to be very conscious of the fact that that is your DNA, that is your blueprint. And that's what helps you stand out versus all the noise and all the competition that's out there. Um, you know, basically, the process you go through in building a corporate brand, and you were saying marketing is marketing is marketing. When I started my career in consumer products, B2C, and then one of those startups I worked for was B2B. People said, well, what do you know about B2B? You've been doing B2C your entire career.
Right.
There are a lot more similarities than differences.
And ultimately, it's a person who is making the purchase.
Bingo. I always say B2B, B2C, it's all P2P. It's always, there's always a person on the other end making a buying or not buying decision. So it's absolutely critical that you own real estate in your customer's brain so that they think of you first every time they have a problem that your product or service can help them solve. That is the name of the game today.
Right.
So you want to kind of go through and do an audit of everything that's out there, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Right.
Where are you strong? Where are you weak? Where are those opportunity areas? What is it that's unique, special, and different about you? That a problem that you solve that's intuitive for you, that you do better than anybody else. And you carve out that niche. And the more specific, the more targeted the audience, the better.
Right. We talk about that a lot on this podcast.
Yeah. And I think where a lot of people, I'm not Coca-Cola. I worked for Coke. It's an amazing company and an amazing brand. And it's been around for over 100 years. And they do need to advertise 365
right.
days.
Because they don't want somebody buying Pepsi.
Exactly. But for small businesses like yours or mine, we don't need millions of customers or clients. We need a few people that we can help solve really important problems for them. And if we do a great job, they're going to come back for more and they're going to tell their friends about it. And people are going to notice them and say, how did they get to be so successful?
Right. Right.
And then they hear about us and that's great for us. And so, when you're building your brand, you want to do kind of a communications audit and find out what it is that people think about your business or your brand?
And you yourself.
Exactly. So what are the words that come up when people say, tell me about Deb? What is Deb great at? When do I think of Deb first? Where are areas where Deb is superior to anybody else? Where is Deb the go-to person? And you start and you ask people from different parts of your life, people that know you personally, professionally. Maybe you've got hobbies that are similar. You've got kids in the same school. Maybe you play tennis with them, and see where the overlaps are. Are there themes that are emerging? Are there areas that, really consistently tell a very interesting story?
Right. Are there things you need to fix?
Exactly. And if there's some inconsistencies, let's dig in a little deeper and see what that's all about. If people who know you professionally think you're really buttoned up and serious, and people who know you personally or as a child think of you as a comedian and somebody who's always pulling pranks, that's kind of an issue. Like that doesn't really,
because those worlds could intermix.
Exactly. And so some people might say to me, on Facebook, I'm doing really stupid, silly things. I'm on vacation and I'm, kind of being silly and sexy in my bikini and, running around.
And then the $1 million potential client looks at it and goes, huh.
Bingo.
Now they might actually go, woo, but
But on LinkedIn, people want to be professional and buttoned up.
Right.
But as you said, everybody sees everything now. It's not these silos. It's, if you're putting stuff on Instagram or X or Pinterest and it's a little snarky or a little shady, it's going to tarnish your brand. It's going to make people maybe think of you a little bit differently. So you want to clean up your digital dirt. One of the easy kind of reality checks you can do is go to Google and Google yourself.
Yes.
Amen.
Find what comes up. Now, I have a benefit. First, I think there's 2, maybe 3 Deb careers in the world. And I have over 1,000 podcast episodes. I have, I've got a lot of content out there. So the other 2 Deb careers, God bless them, they're never going to show up.
Bingo. And like you, my name is unique pretty much too. Hyphenated last name. And I've been doing this for more than 2 decades. I also have a lot of content out there. So for people like you and me, when they put our names in, it's really us. They will see what pops up.
Right.
If your name is Bob Smith or Susan Jones,
you got to work.
You got to do a lot of work.
Right.
You might even consider putting your LinkedIn profile in your signature so that people can
find you
directly.
Right.
And it's not, you don't make them work hard. The other challenge some people have is what happens if you share a name with a bank robber or a serial
I had that
killer.
happen with somebody one time. I was doing a LinkedIn seminar on, for people in the job market.
Yeah.
And so we were talking about, this was back when you still really did cover letters. And I think, and that's been long. I think people still do those. But anyhow, this gentleman came up to me and he showed me his cover letter and I busted out laughing. And he, it's just, yada, 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 yada. Right. And then it said, now, when you Google me, which I know you will, please know I am not the murderer.
No, and that's very smart because it shows that he knows how the world works and he's in on the joke.
Right. Yeah. So he did it in a lighthearted way, but it was, hey, that's not me.
Right. And here's my LinkedIn, by the way, if you want to check me out.
Yes.
And so they can check him out through the back channel. So that's really important today, that you want to show that you're business savvy, that you understand how things work. Because if people, you have to assume people are going to check you out and they're going to make a pretty quick decision. Do I want to invite this person onto my podcast? Do I want to meet them for lunch or coffee? And if they don't like what they see or it raises more questions or concerns,
right,
they're going to
They
move
go
on
to the next one.
exactly.
Right.
So
and it's okay to be edgy, to be snarky, whatever that is, if that truly is, because we all talk about you have to be authentic, you have to be authentic. I had a woman one time who wanted to be a guest on the podcast, and she did public relations. Now, bless her, every sentence had a swear word in it. Now, I knew this from her before we ever started the podcast, right? And I have to certify when I submit my podcast that it is clean, which means it does not have George Carlin's words in it. And now it's pretty much just the big one, right? But yeah, I mean, and so you can't have that. And so I told her, I said, you gotta tone it back. You cannot, because I couldn't go beep, 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 right? And she said, well, that's me. That's how I talk. And I said, well, and she said, but more importantly, she said that matches my clients. She worked with very edgy, outdoor, young clients. And I said, okay, that's cool, but it's not going to work on the podcast.
Bingo.
And then I had a gentleman one time who I was giving him the same spiel. And I think he said, is it okay if I swear? I said, no, and he said, I'll be right back. And I was like, what the heck? And we were just doing audio, no video. So I didn't know what was going on. And pretty soon I could hear giggle, giggle, right? Child. And so he gets back on and he said, my 3-year-old is now here coloring. I do not swear in front of her. That was and so, yeah, I mean, if you're going to swear like a sailor and that's you and your clients are that, then that's okay. I'm here in the South. People do not swear here. In fact, in some places, it's against the law. And so that's just not going to work. Now, I mean, I've been here 13 years. If I say one of those George Carlin words, I don't say it online, right? But if I say one of those, people know, now that took work. But yeah, I mean, it's okay to be authentic, but you need to understand, just like posting about politics, about religion. I'm never going to tell somebody they shouldn't do that, but they need to understand that half-ish of the people who they're connected with are not going to like that. And if they're okay with that, then that's fine.
Exactly. No, that is the thing. When you're building your personal brand, it needs to be authentically you and represent the things that are important to you, your core values, and the brand that you want to portray, and the types of clients or customers you want to attract.
Right.
And there's nothing good or bad about anything. It's just making a very conscious decision.
Right.
And once you do that, stick with it. But again, unless you're Coca-Cola or a big mass marketed brand, you don't need everybody to be your client or customer.
Right. And I mean, it's, your image. I mean, all of this comes into this. As you were talking, I was thinking about Steve Jobs and his turtlenecks, or Mark Zuckerberg, who never wore a suit and tie. I think now he's kind of gotten to where he will every once in a while, but that was just not them. But they also, because of who they are, they can get away with that. Right. And that's the other thing. I mean, not to talk politics here, but when the Ukrainian president met with our president and did not wear a suit and tie, that was very frowned upon. I don't care who the presidents are. I mean, there's a protocol. If I ever went and met with King Charles, I would not go in jeans and shorts. I mean, or any of those things. But the Ukrainian president was like, nope, this is me.
But the thing is, everything communicates.
Right.
How you dress, what you drive, what you look like, all of those things they say something about you.
Right.
And I think, on LinkedIn, if people look super buttoned up, very professional, they talk, at a very high level. If you run into them at the grocery store or at the soccer field for a kid's tournament or at the airport and they look like a hot mess,
right. You're like, you have a twin.
Bingo. Like that's going to raise more questions. Right. And dilute your brand that you're building.
Right.
I'm not saying you need to be dressed to the nines everywhere.
Right.
But you need, if your image is kind of professional, There's something in the UK, I think they call it smart casual. You want to look like, you clean up well because
Right.
that's the image you're portraying. And that's when people say, oh, I have a very high opinion of that brand or that business or that person. It's because every time they see them in any environment, they're showing up consistently.
Right.
And a brand is a promise of a consistent experience.
Right.
Imagine if you walked into McDonald's or Starbucks or, any business that's a global brand. And every time you walked in, whether you were in Chicago or Paris or Toronto or San Francisco, it was a different menu,
Right.
a
Am I
different
going to get a
layout.
Big Mac?
Right. And that would be confusing and that would hurt their sales
Right.
because people go back for more because they know what they like. They
Right.
want to hang out there. They want to just sit and relax and meet people for coffee or for a snack or for a meal. And they feel confident when they walk in
Right.
that they're going to get what they want and they like, and they know about how
Right.
much it's going to cost. And that's good branding.
Right. And it does change as you were talking about this country to country. You have to adapt to that, right? When you're going to go into McDonald's in India, you're going to get a different product. I remember I went to McDonald's in Scotland and it was different. And I was like, well, wait a minute. I don't even think they have Big Macs. I mean, who knows? But they have adapted to that country. But then every single McDonald's in that country is going to be the same. I mean, that's the thing. And you can, again, you have to be authentic. I used to be the buttoned up. I would not go anywhere professionally if I didn't have a suit on and heels and bleh, all of this. And then I got sick. And aside from anything else, I lost a whole bunch of weight. So none of my fancy schmancy clothes fit. And there was no way I was going to have them tailored. I mean, it was, and so I thought, maybe I'm not a suit person anymore. So I do not own high heels. I do not own a suit. And so, like, my picture on LinkedIn is more casual. Now, it is still, as you said, smart professional or smart casual, or because I have on a jacket. Now it's a denim jacket. And and so that's me. Now, but that said, if I were to say to go meet with a big bank, I would go get a suit, and I would go in and match with what they are. But yeah, I am much more casual now, and that's just me.
And that's okay too, because brands do get refreshed.
Right.
They do evolve over time. I mean, look at Madonna. I mean,
Right.
she's been
Yeah,
famous
no pointy cones anymore.
for decades. And when she used to have that overly bleached blonde hair,
Right.
heavy makeup, like you said, very harsh clothing. And then she went through the kind of leather phase. And
Right. And then she became a mother.
Exactly. And then she's got kids and she's kind of got into yoga and the Kabbalah. And now she's in her, what, 60, mid 60s. And she's evolved and it's kept her relevant decade after decade.
Right.
So there's nothing wrong with evolving your brand, but you need to do it thoughtfully,
yes,
intentionally, and consistently so that you're not the 80s Madonna in one place and the 2025 Madonna in another place. That doesn't work.
Right. And it is tricky on social because I mean, and you mentioned this, we all seem to think we have a different persona on whichever one it was. And that's not the case because again, we could be connected with people on all of it and it could be searchable. I mean, all these various things. I remember when I was teaching in Colorado, I taught a communications class for Metro State University. And I had this one student. Now she was a straight A student. She was a cheerleader. She never missed my 8 o'clock class, all of these various things. And now as a teacher, I would not connect with my students on social. I just, no, I told him, I said, I don't want you to tell me you didn't get your paper done because your grandma died. And then I look on Facebook and you were partying. No, I'm just not going to do that. I said, now after, sure. But she came up to you and she was getting ready to go into the job market. So she said, can we talk about this? Her LinkedIn profile was beautiful. It was very professionally done. She had all of her volunteer activities because she didn't have a lot of work experience. So a lot of volunteer activities, all of this. And then I go to, it was still called Twitter then. I went there. That's one of those branding things. I'm like, what the heck, right? But yeah, so I went to Twitter and her Twitter name was her name. So it was very easy to find her. And her posts were profanity filled. I mean, all sorts of things. And so I, called her up after class. I'd never, call her out in class. And I said, what gives? And she said, that's how my friends talk. And on Twitter, it's just my friends. I said, okay, no, because I found it.
Right.
And I said, so you don't have anything marked private. I mean, there was nothing. I mean, and I said, so I wouldn't even give you a reference because it's my reputation.
Right. It's a bad reflection.
Yes. And I said, you know what, if you want to do that or have, cute doll 21, whatever, as then make those so private that it makes it much harder for, an HR person or whatever to find it. And I said, and then on your professional Twitter feed, that's where it's going to be professional, or don't do it at all. I mean, and I said, and if you're not going to do it, there are people who have no social presence. And I tell them it's better to do that than to have kind of a halfway. But yeah, but that's how my friends talk. And I said, nah.
Yeah.
No,
I mean, especially for people in the job market, you nailed it because it is a reflection of the business and the brand they're joining. Their personal brand's going to be associated with that. And if you Google them and all that comes up is a bunch of digital dirt,
yes,
you're in deep trouble.
Right.
Because you want to kind of scrub it, get that stuff off the internet publicly.
Right.
It
still might exist.
Right. But you start generating a lot of good content that pushes
it down.
And if you do that, you're going to be much better off than adding to confusion or concern.
Right.
Because companies are not going to take a flyer on somebody who's going to be a bad reflection on them.
Right. Right. Yeah. And I'm not going to give my money to a company where, the owner has been talking about, partying all weekend and all sorts of things. Now, does that make me shallow? Sure, maybe. But, it's a choice I'm going to make. And so people need to realize that. And that kind of comes back maybe to the politics and religion discussion, and especially right now, because it's a tricky, delicate world.
Yeah. People buy brands they know, like, and trust.
Right.
And so find ways to make those connections that people feel like, they want to do business with you.
Right.
Because, every category's got lots of competition. So sometimes it's easier just to rule things out.
Yes. Next.
People make very quick decisions in a split second. And if you kind of raise concern or alarm, you just get shoved to the side and then they're going to go with someone else. And, it turns out you might have been a great fit for them, but they're not going to invest a lot of time and energy if the first impression is not good. You get one chance to make a great first impression.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Don't blow
it's a first impression.
Yeah. If you want them to come back, it's going to cost you a lot of time and a lot of money, and they might not change their mind.
Right.
So set yourself up for success for sure.
Right. And I am all for on social people posting whatever they want to post. I'm never going to say, now I might raise my eyebrow, and my mother, that one eyebrow that my mom taught me how to do, but but you do need to remember who is going to see it. And, I remember one time I had someone who they're very, very strong political views, and doesn't matter which party. It really does not matter, but this person had very strong political views, and they posted about it on Facebook. And they asked me, they said, what did I think? And I said, well, you can post whatever you want. And I said, but you need to understand that, especially in the world of politics, it is still pretty much 50-50-ish, right?
Exactly.
And so, if you're fine with alienating 50% of potential clients, then that's it. And I said,
Right.
but I also get that you want to stay authentic to yourself. I said, so it's just a decision you need to make. I've mentioned this on the program before. I was working with a group of students one time on their LinkedIn profiles, and one young woman had a T-shirt on in her LinkedIn picture, which I wasn't real wild about that, but it said "Proud Muslim," and so I brought her up afterwards, and I said, and this was 10-ish years ago. I said, that's going to cause some issues. And she said, I know that. And I want to eliminate the people who are going to have a problem before I ever talk to them. I went, okay. That was
That's
a
a
very
strategy
clear
too.
decision she made. Yep.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that's a
Mm-hmm.
strategy.
Right.
And
Mm-hmm.
when you're in sales, getting a quick no is
Mm-hmm.
actually a gift.
Yeah. You're
Because
done. You move on.
right, you go find the
Mm-hmm.
yes.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not bad if there's not a
Mm-hmm.
connection, if there's no chemistry.
Mm-hmm.
It's really the best case
Mm-hmm.
scenario is you shake hands and you
Mm-hmm.
part ways,
Right.
and you don't waste
Mm-hmm.
time with tire
Mm-hmm.
kickers
Mm-hmm.
or people that
Mm-hmm.
are, just gonna run your
Mm-hmm.
energy
Mm-hmm.
down and, have nothing to show
Mm-hmm.
for it. So
Right.
like you said, it's fine to put a
Mm-hmm.
stake in the ground,
Mm-hmm.
um, and realize that not
Mm-hmm.
everyone's going to be there with
Mm-hmm.
you. But I
Mm-hmm.
think the goal really on branding is you want to put a stake in the ground where you've got the best hook,
Mm-hmm.
where you're really
Mm-hmm.
aligned.
Right.
People forget when
Mm-hmm.
Amazon started as a business,
Mm-hmm.
it was the world's biggest bookseller.
Right.
The only thing they did
Mm-hmm.
was sell you
Mm-hmm.
books. And it's hard to even remember, but
Mm-hmm.
this was before e-commerce was
Right. Mm-hmm.
everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And so the thought that you were going to put in your credit card
Mm-hmm.
number and have
Mm-hmm.
this company that you didn't know
Right. In
do a
in
book,
Washington or Oregon, I don't remember
right?
which, but mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
Washington
Mm-hmm.
State. When there were bookstores
Mm-hmm.
all over in
Mm-hmm.
malls and in most
Right.
cities,
Mm-hmm.
and people did it, and they got the book a few days
Mm-hmm.
later, and they said, "Wow, that worked
Mm-hmm.
nicely."
Mm-hmm.
And then when they got your business and they built a relationship there, they expanded into music, and
Mm-hmm.
now you can buy CDs
Mm-hmm.
and DVDs and movies. So they took baby steps,
Mm-hmm.
and now Amazon basically has keys to your house practically. I mean,
Oh, they can get in your garage if you let them.
yeah, and you can buy anything on
Mm-hmm.
I mean, jewelry,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, big ticket
Mm-hmm.
items.
Mm-hmm.
People don't have a concern or qualm in the world
Mm-hmm.
about buying anything from
Mm-hmm.
Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
But they didn't start there.
Right.
They grew
Mm-hmm.
very
Mm-hmm.
logically and intentionally
Mm-hmm.
over time. Again, building the relationship, building the trust.
Mm-hmm.
And there were hiccups.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody
Right.
probably has an
Mm-hmm.
example where a package didn't come or it
Mm-hmm.
came damaged.
Mm-hmm.
And you saw they were
Mm-hmm.
honest, they resolved it.
Yep.
That happens.
Mm-hmm.
How you
Mm-hmm.
kind of recover from those,
Mm-hmm.
that's part of your brand
Mm-hmm.
too. And that can be a
Mm-hmm.
very powerful relationship
Right.
when
Mm-hmm.
people see you're good for it.
Mm-hmm.
I trust you, you're
Mm-hmm.
honest. That
Mm-hmm.
that's amazing.
Right.
Um, and Oprah, when Oprah started, she was
Mm-hmm.
like a journalist newscaster.
Right. On some,
Yeah. And
little
then
TV station.
exactly, small market.
Mm-hmm.
Then she started her talk
Mm-hmm.
show. Then she started reading books and doing
Mm-hmm.
the book club.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, again, it's baby
Mm-hmm.
steps.
Mm-hmm.
And now Oprah is one of the most respected and,
Right. Mm-hmm.
people in the world. She's like
Mm-hmm.
a media, she has a magazine,
Mm-hmm.
got her own
Mm-hmm.
network, but she didn't start there.
Right.
So think
Mm-hmm.
about where you want to
Mm-hmm.
start, where you're going to
Mm-hmm.
build stack the deck in your
Mm-hmm.
favor, set
Mm-hmm.
yourself up for
Mm-hmm.
success, and grow from there.
Mm-hmm.
And
Right.
I know for my business, I had a very strong marketing resume.
Mm-hmm.
I had spent a lot of years doing marketing at the
Mm-hmm.
highest level.
Mm-hmm.
So when our name is not marketing,
Mm-hmm.
but if you go to the website, the tagline says, because marketing matters.
Right. So you know exactly what it is.
And so our first clients were all marketing projects. Once we got in there and we did a great job, and they said, while you're here, can I ask you a question about sales? Or can I ask you a question? We're doing some recruiting. And before you knew it, once your nose is under the tent and you've got that relationship, we can help on a whole bunch of levels.
Right.
But I didn't say that the first time because you don't want to throw 10 different things at somebody.
Right.
It's best to stand for one or two things, do it really well, repeat it consistently, build those relationships, and then grow from there. And if you do it that way, slowly over time, that's how you really stand out and, plant those deep seeds where people can come back and they know they can trust you. And I am always a little wary when brands talk about trusted and ethical. If you have to tell me that.
Yeah. It's like clean restrooms. Really?
Exactly.
Are they not?
Right. It raises more questions. So I always say, show, don't tell. Be trustworthy. Be honest. Be ethical.
Right.
Just do the right thing for the right reason. People will notice. They will come back for more. They will tell other people about you. But, just be thoughtful. I think so much of marketing is about really delivering on the promises that you make. They always say under promise, over deliver.
Right.
Show value, solve problems. If you do that, you're in great shape.
Right. And one of the things that always bothers people is when people say bad things, right? So bad reviews, bad comments, and we all want to be the ostrich. Oh, but I want to deal with it. Oh, no, no. And of course, I tell my clients, those are absolutely the first things we have to deal with.
You are 100% right. You cannot ignore bad tweets, bad press, bad
because they grow.
Exactly. And it's not the screw up, it's the cover up that gets you every time. Everybody makes mistakes.
Right. Oh, yeah.
And so if you come clean and resolve the problem in a way that satisfies your customer, your client, it's almost the best of all scenarios because they become more loyal to you. They trust you more because you owned it. You said, we screwed up.
Right.
We know how it happened. We fixed the problem. Thank you for bringing this to our attention.
And we're sorry.
We're sorry, and it's not going to happen again.
Right.
And when you do that, again, you are building your brand equity. You're not diluting your brand because it's how you respond. It's how you pivot. It's how you recover. And those are all opportunities to double down on the relationship and to be even more successful. I was the first head of marketing for Zipcar when it started on the early car sharing days. And, for those of you that have experienced Zipcar, any of the car sharing companies, you reserve a car, you go to the spot, and you get in and go run your errands or go to your interview.
Oh, cool.
Well, at the very beginning, there were a few times when people got to the designated location.
And no car.
There was no car because the person that had it before didn't bring it back in time. And what we did is we either, if there was another car nearby, we'd say, can you walk 2 blocks south?
Right.
I've got a car reserved. It's ready to go. We're going to give you driving credit. We're so sorry. And if there was no car, you put them in a taxi. You say, I don't
you don't leave them in a lurch.
Right. I don't want you to be late for your interview. We're so sorry. We're going to fix this. And, we're going to own it.
Right.
And in the newsletter after that, we will write an article and say, we had an unfortunate incident this month. Someone didn't bring back the car on time. We told that person, the next time this happens, we're kicking you out.
Right. You don't get to play.
Right. If you don't play by the rules, And we are so sorry. And now we have a new system. When your car is about to expire, there's a little beeping alarm that's going to start going off in the car. And so if you're hearing the beep, you know it's time to hurry back.
Right.
And so people appreciate this. So, oh my goodness, what a great idea. Oh my, thank God it was, that person didn't miss their interview. That person ended up being so much more loyal.
Right.
Zipcar and told a million people how great the service was.
Right.
How, it's still so much cheaper than owning a car, how much they appreciated it, how much the company got them and had their back. And so you've got a testimonial and a champion and a fan for life.
Right.
And so again, it's not a bad thing. You want people to tell you your problems and you want to solve those problems because that's the way to really be integral in people's lives. That's how you stand out.
Right. And you don't want to blame others. I tell people it's just like, you're sitting in a restaurant and, my purse is on the floor and the waiter trips on my purse and spills water on me. There's two options. They could say, well, you idiot, your purse was in the way. Or they could say, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Can I get you a free dessert? And then I'm like, I'm coming back here every day.
Exactly.
And because, I knew it was, I would know it was my fault. But it's all in how it's handled. My clients, they don't always want to deal with it. And and because, it's like, well, it's not our fault. We didn't do that, yada, yada, yada. And I tell them, nope. And now the funny thing is, we write responses, whether it's Google reviews, Facebook reviews, whatever, we write them and post them. And I've been doing social for clients for 15 years. I mean, pretty much when it kind of started. I can think of maybe two times when the original person who had the complaint responded. They never go back. They never look. But what you're doing is that response is for the next people who see it.
Bingo. And
that's the thing, and one of the funniest ones I ever saw one time was a hotel thing. We travel a lot. And so I'm always looking on, the various sites at what people are saying about hotels. And one of them said, somebody's review said, oh my God, it was so horrible. It was so noisy. The bars that were nearby were noisy, yada, yada, yada. I mean, it was, and all this. And the response cracked me up because they said, well, we're very sorry you had this experience. However, we're surrounded by not bars, right? And they said, so we do think that you might have the wrong property, but please step in or please be sure to check us out because we'll make sure that you have a great stay. And so, because they didn't want to say, they needed to clear up that they weren't surrounded by bars, but they did it in a way that didn't say, you idiot, you've given your review to the wrong place.
Right.
It was just, oh, we think maybe you've made a mistake because we don't have any bars near us, but we'd love the chance to show you what our property is like. And I'm like, okay, stay in there.
Exactly. No, that's great customer service.
Right.
And yeah, you don't want things like that out in the social world lingering because unless you clear it up, people are going to make their own conclusions.
Right.
And it's a bad reflection. So
we make bad conclusions.
Yes. Exactly.
That's the thing is if they didn't respond, we're like, well, what's wrong with them? How come they didn't do any, how come they didn't?
Exactly. Not only are they loud, but they're rude.
Right. And I spent a lot of time doing crisis communications and I love the lawyers. The lawyers are the people who we really need in there. But saying I'm sorry is not saying we're to blame. And I think that's kind of the big distinction is there. You can say, I'm really sorry you had this experience. You're not saying we screwed up, and we, somebody says, I'm sorry. We're like, oh, okay.
Again, it's human. Everybody screws up.
Right.
Yeah. The worst thing you can do is no comment or not respond.
Right.
Because again, people are going to jump to probably the worst case scenario.
Yeah, they didn't respond because they knew they were wrong. Right. Well, oh my gosh, Paige, this is so much fun. We've just scratched the surface on this.
I was going to say, I feel like I could talk a lot longer.
Because like one of the things that we didn't talk about that's huge is how much money does all this cost? And of course, it's not a lot now, folks. I remember when I used to buy URLs back when Al Gore first invented the internet. And it was what, like $275 to buy a URL. I'm thinking that's right. And now it's, you get it on GoDaddy for $1.99 and you get, all of this. And so, we definitely have to have you on again because there's so much more to talk about. And so we will do that. But until then, for people who are going, I have to talk to Paige and her team, how do they find you and what are the services that you provide?
So the best place to find me is either my website, mavensandmoguls.com. It's MAVENSANDMOGULS.com. I'm on LinkedIn. That's a good place to find me.
And we've got those both links in the show notes.
Yeah. Or you can just Google Paige and Mavens and I'll pop right up.
I love it.
Basically, the kind of work that we do is anything a marketing department, ad agency, PR agency, or market research shop does. So think of us as like a virtual marketing department for organizations that need access to great marketing talent on an as needed basis.
I love it. I love it. And everybody needs help. I mean, that's the thing. Even if you have in-house marketing people, sometimes it's great just to get a new opinion, a new take on things, all of those things. And so I love that. But, as I said, we've got your LinkedIn and a link to Mavens and Moguls in the show notes. We will have you back because clearly we had so much fun talking about this. And so we will do that. But until then, do you have any final thoughts that you want to leave everyone with?
So I hope I've convinced you listening in on this that everybody's a brand. Clean up your digital dirt, be consistent, and tell a great story. And once you find the hooks that are resonating, make sure you're doing it consistently on all platforms, everywhere you are. Live your brand every day. Great brands are built from the inside out. So make sure that they all tell a consistent story. If you do that, you're going to be way ahead of the game. And again, for most small businesses, you don't need everybody to be your customer or client. Find the niche that you do better than anybody else. There's something unique, special, and different that people value that you do. Help them find you. Don't be invisible. And really just deliver on the promises that you make. Doing those simple things, it doesn't need to cost a ton of money. If you do that well, you can build a really solid, successful business.
Oh my gosh. Such wise words. See, this is why wise women, right? So, I am Deb Creer. I've been having so much fun talking with Paige Arnof-Fenn of Mavens and Moguls. Boy, that's a big mouthful. And until next time, everyone have a great day.
Tune in for our next program for even more trends, best practices, and techniques for how to make your business a success. The Business Power Hour, hosted by Deb Creer, is proud to be part of the C-Suite Network.